So I didn't plan on doing a Sinners Part 3, but somebody asked me a great question, and I think this is worth expounding on. So they asked why were the Choctaw chasing Remick? And I think this has everything to do with the opening scene of the movie. Because if you guys recall, there was this brief preface where they kind of described the West African griots, and then they mentioned the Choctaw and Irish equivalents of that. So I think the Irish were called the Phillies, and the Choctaw were the firekeepers. But they're essentially the same thing. They're the people in the community who hold the ancestral memories. They're the people with the gift of music and who have the ability to basically tap into the ancestral plane. So I think what happened with that was similar to what happened with Sammy. They may have been engaging in some type of indigenous practice or maybe making music or something that was opening up the ancestral realm. And I think Remick was drawn to that the way that he was drawn to Sammy. He wanted to covet that gift. But this is what I found very interesting about that. It really puts on display the comparative differences between the indigenous people of this land and our ancestors. Because while they did suffer similar fates at the hands of the same people, they have a longer memory than we do historically because their history has always been linked to this land. Our history comes from different lands in Africa. So a lot of us came here from different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, and we were forced to create a sense of culture amongst each other simply because we looked alike. But imagine how much folklore, how many stories, and how much history and heritage was lost when we had to kind of make that transition. The indigenous, while they were moved around this country, they were never removed from this land. So they've always been on their native land, and everything that they practice is indigenous to this land. So there's no disconnect in their history the way that there is in ours. So they probably recognize Remick for what he was right off the bat. And I think that that's why they were chasing him. But one thing I gotta say, they knew to mind their business. They went and told these people, hey, look, you letting somebody in here that shouldn't be here. But when that lady said, man, basically get up out of here, they left. And you ain't see them again in the whole movie. They ain't never popped up again. Now, in reference to us, like I said, I think that our memory has been so shaken up based on everything that we've gone through, having to learn and relearn and figure out how to adapt in this land, going through enslavement, generational trauma, that there was just stories that got lost. So we probably wouldn't have recognized that these people were vampires, but we know that something is wrong. And off top, we just didn't trust white people then. We shouldn't be trusting them now, just saying. But I think that that's what that was. But Annie, being tapped in spiritually, did know that something was wrong. She may not have known that they were vampires initially, but she did figure that out because she was taught by her grandmother, which was also referenced. So there was a lineage of history that wasn't broken with her. Remember, she was the one from the bayou. At least that's what Cornbread said, that Louisiana bayou bullshit he called it. But it's what saved a lot of people's lives in that movie. Well, not a lot of people, but it saved Sammy, and he was the most important, clearly. Another thing that I noticed about Remick, now I already made the connection to him in colonization, but I think that he was also indicative of the way that white people are devoid of culture. And I'm not saying this as a jab, I want y'all to hear me on this because this is real. I think that we sometimes forget that white people had their heritage removed from them too. Now, it was their people who stole it from them, but they still don't have a sense of ancestral heritage or ancestral connection because they were given the culture of whiteness. Their people basically traded their heritage to assimilate to whiteness to benefit from the privileges of that, but it removed them from what actually gives you power, which is a connection to your roots. And I think that's why they try so hard to infiltrate other people's communities, specifically ours, because we are the most spiritually tapped in and ancestrally tapped in, regardless of everything we've been through. We actually feel, they like to feel, but they can't connect to it themselves because the only history that they know is that of colonization. Everything that they're linked to from this land is negative unless they actually know their roots or they're not from here or they're first or second generation and they have, some type of memory or connection to who their people actually were. So the way Remick was moving was actually very indicative of the way that they move, because as soon as we allow them into a space, it's not enough for them to just have proximity to us, to be able to bask in our spiritual capabilities or our gifts or the abilities that we have to create fun, to create culture, to create art, whatever. They have to control it. They have to own it. And that's what he was doing. He could obviously feel what Sammy was creating. He could feel what the Choctaw was creating, but it wasn't enough for him. He had to actually be able to control it. It had to be his. And that's exactly how they move now. And that actually makes me think of them a little bit differently because this is a conditioned type of thing. That's all that they actually know. So they got a lot of work to do to fix themselves, but that was a good little insight for me. Another thing too, because they mentioned the Irish Phillies in the beginning, I have to wonder if that's what Remick was initially. Was he somebody who had that gift and then somebody changed him? Because I remember him saying that he was stuck here. He's like, I'm stuck here, like stuck in his existence, which leads me to believe that he wasn't always a vampire. It has to start somewhere. But somebody must have coveted him for his own gifts. Maybe he was the griot or, the Philly of his people, and he had that connection to the ancestral realm, but then he lost it. That could explain why he needed to control it so much. I'm gonna see it again, y'all, because as you guys have probably seen, they're only 85 million away from surpassing Avatar, and I think everybody should go see it again. I've already seen it hella times, but grab your crew, get them together, and go see the movie again because we need to push this over because it was actually very well done, and there's so much to think about, and I'm sure there's still a lot that I've missed. So I'm gonna go again this weekend. I'm gonna probably take my mama or maybe go with some friends. I don't know, but I think everybody should. Love y'all.